Jason felt like the white walls of the exam room were closing in on him, making it hard to breathe. He sat on the edge of the padded table, his legs hanging down, a thin paper sheet draped over his lap, offering little protection. The room was cold and empty of personal touches, a place where emotions were supposed to be left outside. Yet, every part of Jason's body buzzed with nervousness and something deeper, something he didn't want to name. Dr. Victor Johnson, the man whose presence made Jason feel a rush of heat, was standing across from him, looking through his medical records. Victor's deep hazel eyes, which Jason had noticed from their first meeting, scanned the pages with a look that was both professional and personal. He was in his late 30s with a calm that came from years of experience, but there was also a warmth in his voice that made Jason feel noticed, not just as a patient, but as a person. Victor cleared his throat, bringing Jason back to reality. "Jason, I see you've been having some issues, and I want to talk openly with you about them. It's important for me to understand your concerns, especially if they're affecting your mental or physical health." Jason nodded, feeling his throat go dry. "Yeah, I guess you could say that," he mumbled, looking away. Talking about his sex life, or rather, the lack of it, with Victor felt like removing his last bit of protection. His cheeks burned with embarrassment, and he was afraid of making a fool of himself. "Don't worry," Victor said softly, meeting Jason's eyes. "This is a safe space. Anything you tell me stays between us." Hearing those words in Victor's gentle tone was Jason's breaking point. He shared his fears, the nights he couldn't sleep, the loneliness that ate at him, the past trauma that always lingered. He spoke about his struggle to feel close to anyone, to trust anyone, and how it made him feel broken. Every word felt like a confession, a part of his soul laid bare before Victor, who listened without interrupting or judging. Victor nodded, his face serious, but Jason saw the empathy in his eyes. "Thank you for being so open with me, Jason. It takes a lot of courage to share something so personal." Jason looked at Victor's hands, now gloved and holding a stethoscope. His heart skipped a beat. He had been lost in talking, and now Victor was ready to continue with the exam. "I'm going to need to examine you below the waist. I'll tell you what I'm doing step by step. If you feel uncomfortable at any time, just let me know, and we'll stop." Jason's heart pounded in his chest. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Victor's hands were gentle and professional, but Jason couldn't stop the wave of heat that ran through him with each touch. It wasn't just about the exam. It was about Victor's calm reassurance, the way he explained every move as if Jason's comfort was the most important thing. In Jason's mind, the exam became something else, a charged interaction between professionalism and a deep, unspoken attraction. As Victor finished, he looked up and met Jason's eyes. The air between them felt heavy, full of tension. Neither spoke, but in that silent moment, there was a recognition, a shared feeling of the attraction that lay beneath the surface. Victor cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Everything looks fine physically, Jason, but I think it might help to talk to a therapist about what you've been through. Trauma can affect us for a long time after the events happen." Jason nodded, still caught in Victor's gaze. "Yeah, I've been meaning to. Victor placed a hand on Jason's shoulder, a touch meant to comfort, but igniting a spark they both felt. "Take your time. Healing isn't a straight line, and it's okay to ask for help." Jason swallowed hard, his feelings a tangled mess. The session ended, but as he got dressed and left the office, he knew he couldn't just walk away from what had happened, not in his heart. Something had changed, and he couldn't ignore it. He also knew that despite the risks, despite the clear professional boundaries Victor had set, there was a connection between them that was undeniable. The days after the appointment were a blur for Jason. His thoughts kept drifting back to Victor, his touch, his voice, the way his eyes softened when he listened. He couldn't shake the memory of that moment when their eyes met, the air buzzing with unspoken desire. Jason's nights were filled with restless dreams, replaying the scene over and over, each time adding more tension and closeness. He knew it was risky to fantasize about his doctor, but he couldn't stop himself. 3 days later, Jason found himself at a local coffee shop. The smell of roasted coffee beans filled the air, but it didn't do much to calm his nerves. He sat at a corner table, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. The shop was busy, filled with the murmur of conversations and the hiss of the espresso machine, but Jason's mind was elsewhere, lost in his own thoughts. Jason, a familiar voice broke through his thoughts, bringing him back to reality. He looked up to see Victor standing by his table, dressed casually in jeans and a blue sweater. Outside the clinic, Victor looked different, less guarded, more relaxed. The sight of him made Jason's heart skip a beat. He stumbled over his words, his heart racing. Victor, Dr. Johnson. Victor's smile was gentle, almost shy. Just Victor. I didn't expect to see you here. Jason managed a small smile, though his hands were shaking slightly. Yeah, this is my usual spot. It's quieter than most places. Good for thinking. Victor nodded, glancing around before pointing to the empty chair across from Jason. Do you mind if I join you? Jason shook his head, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. As Victor sat down, their knees brushed under the table, sending a jolt through Jason's body. He tried to keep his cool, worried his face might reveal the storm of emotions inside him. They started by talking about everyday things, the weather, the news, the best coffee shops in town. Jason found himself laughing at Victor's dry humor, slowly feeling his nerves ease. Victor's presence was soothing, and soon Jason felt like they were the only two people there. But as the conversation slowed, Jason's mind wandered back to their last meeting, and the tension that had been just beneath their professional conversation. I've been thinking about what you said, Jason said suddenly, about therapy and healing. I think you're right, but it's hard. I've always been more comfortable keeping things locked inside. Victor's face softened, his eyes full of understanding. Healing is a process, Jason. It's not something you can rush, and it's okay to be scared. But you're not alone. There are people who care about you and want to help. Jason looked down, his hands tightening into fists on the table. I just don't want to be a burden. I don't want people to see me as broken. Victor reached across the table, placing his hand over Jason's. The touch was gentle and comforting, but it sent a wave of desire through Jason's body. You're not broken, Victor said softly, and you're definitely not a burden. You're just human like all of us. Jason's breath caught, and he met Victor's gaze, searching for any sign that he was imagining things. But the look in Victor's eyes was clear: concern, care, and something more. Something that mirrored Jason's own feelings. Without thinking, Jason leaned in, closing the space between them. His lips brushed against Victor's in a hesitant kiss, testing the waters. For a moment, everything stopped. Jason's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and excitement flooding him. He half expected Victor to pull away, to remind him of the boundaries they were supposed to keep. But Victor didn't move. Instead, he kissed back, his hand coming up to cup Jason's face, deepening their connection. The kiss was gentle, uncertain, but it held a promise of more. Jason's mind was spinning, but his body acted on instinct, moving closer, his hands finding their way to Victor's shoulders. The world around them faded, leaving just the two of them in the busy coffee shop, lost in each other. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads resting together. Victor's voice was unsteady, filled with mixed feelings. Jason, we can't do this. I know, Jason whispered, his fingers still gripping Victor's sweater. I know it's not allowed, but I can't pretend I don't feel something for you, and I think you feel it too. Victor closed his eyes, his face full of conflict. Jason, this isn't just about us. If anyone finds out, I could lose my job. You could get hurt. There are rules for a reason. Jason's heart sank, the reality of their situation hitting him hard. He knew Victor was right. They were standing on a fine line, and one wrong step could bring everything crashing down. But he couldn't ignore how his heart beat faster whenever he was near Victor, the way his body reacted to his touch. I don't care about the rules, Jason said softly, his voice steady with resolve. I care about you. I've been through so much, and I've felt more alive with you than I have in years. I don't want to lose that. Victor opened his eyes, looking into Jason's face. They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words heavy between them. Then slowly, Victor nodded, making a decision. All right, he said quietly, but we need to be careful. We need to go slow and figure this out together. Jason felt a rush of relief and joy. He reached out, squeezing Victor's hand. Together, he agreed, a smile breaking through his worry. But the intensity of the moment was overwhelming. The tension that had built up for weeks was now a powerful force pulling them closer. They couldn't hide their feelings anymore. They knew they had to be cautious, to move carefully in a world that might not understand. But for now, in this moment, nothing else mattered. Back at their table, Jason and Victor held hands under the table, the adrenaline slowly fading, leaving a tender, fragile hope. Jason knew they were stepping into dangerous waters. The road ahead would be tough, filled with challenges and obstacles. But for the first time in a long while, Jason felt hope, a delicate, flickering light in the darkness. He didn't know what the future would bring, but as long as Victor was with him, he was ready to face it.